January 1945. Alsace, France. German soldiers advanced with tanks and 250 men, but what stopped them was not an army. It was a single American, standing alone on a burning tank destroyer. This is the story of Audie Murphy, the most decorated U.S. soldier of the Second World War, against impossible odds. He held back an entire German assault, buying precious time for his company and turning himself into a legend. How could a man barely 5'5", weighing little more than 100 pounds, fight off hundreds and survive? The answer is found in 1 hour of fire and fury that captured America's imagination, a moment that became a symbol of courage and endurance, and helped reshape the nation's memory of the war. January 26, 1945. The snow lay heavy across the Alsace countryside, muffling every sound except the distant growl of German engines. At dawn, pale light revealed the outlines of farmhouses and skeletal trees, all draped in frost, silent witnesses to the last great German push on the Western Front. It was here, near the village of Holtz, that a thin American line held the edge of collapse. The 19th German Army, emboldened by Hitler's orders to retake lost ground, had thrown wave after wave of infantry and armour into the sector. Facing them was the battered 3rd Infantry Division of the United States 7th Army. Its units had already endured weeks of constant fighting in the Vosges Mountains, losses mounting with every mile. By late January, one particular rifle company, Company B of the 15th Infantry Regiment, counted fewer than 30 effective men, where once there had been 150. Exhaustion and frostbite had thinned their ranks as much as bullets and shrapnel. Among them stood a 20-year-old lieutenant, Audie Murphy of Texas, the son of sharecroppers who had known hunger long before he knew war. Barely 5'5", weighing just 112 pounds, Murphy hardly fit the image of a war hero. Yet by 1945 he had already earned the Silver Star and the Distinguished Service Cross for actions in Italy and southern France. His courage was unquestioned. But on this morning his endurance would be tested beyond anything the army could have imagined. The tactical situation was dire. German forces, numbering more than 250 men with at least 6 tanks and armoured vehicles, advanced toward Holtz. If they broke through, they would cut vital supply lines and threaten the entire American position along the Colmar pocket. Company B was ordered to hold, though it possessed neither numbers nor firepower to match the assault. The only heavy weapon in their sector was an M10 tank destroyer, its 75mm gun already disabled by artillery fire. The vehicle sat burning, its ammunition cooking off in sharp cracks that echoed across the snowfields. At 7:30 in the morning, German infantry began to emerge from the mist, moving in disciplined formations, rifles and machine guns glinting. Lieutenant Murphy ordered his men to take cover in the woods, establishing a thin defensive line. Yet as the tanks rumbled closer, the American position seemed hopeless. Here occurred the decision that would pass into legend. Rather than withdraw with his men, Murphy climbed onto the burning Matine. The heat from the flames licked at his boots. Smoke stung his eyes. But atop the wreck lay the vehicle's 50 caliber Browning machine gun. Planting his small frame behind its iron sights, Murphy opened fire. The thunder of the Browning shattered the stillness. At a rate of 500 rounds per minute, its heavy slugs tore into German infantry at ranges of up to 800 yards. Eyewitnesses later recalled the astonishing sight. One man standing against the storm, cutting down squads that had believed themselves invincible. In Murphy's words, he fought as though possessed. For nearly an hour he held his ground, calling in artillery strikes by radio, even as he fired primed by comb. Shells from American batteries pounded the fields, guided by his calm voice, while his machine gun spat death in every direction. German soldiers could hardly believe it. Reports from captured prisoners later described their shock. They thought they faced at least a company with multiple machine guns. Instead, one man behind a flaming hulk was holding back 250. The symbolism was unmistakable, David against Goliath. Except this, David wielded steel and gunpowder. The climax of the fight came when German infantry attempted to flank the burning tank destroyer. Murphy swung the heavy barrel from left to right, firing in bursts that dropped men by the dozen. A German tank directed its cannon at him. But before it could fire, Murphy's artillery coordinates landed squarely on target, forcing the vehicle to retreat. Smoke, flame, and steel fragments filled the air, mingling with the bitter stench of cordite. When his ammunition finally ran low, Murphy leapt from the wreck, rallying his company with a shout, "Let's go get them!" inspired by his defiance. The men of Company B counterattacked, driving the Germans back into the forest. In that moment, the line at Holtz held not because of overwhelming firepower, but because one young lieutenant refused to yield. The aftermath revealed the scale of the miracle. German bodies littered the snow, their number estimated at over 50 killed and many more wounded. The attack had been broken, the supply line saved, the position intact. Murphy himself suffered a leg wound but refused evacuation. His after-action report was almost casual, downplaying what witnesses called an act bordering on the impossible. This was only the beginning of his legend. Within days, word spread through the division. Then across the army, one man on a burning tank had stopped 250. The American press seized on the story, and soldiers at the front whispered his name with awe. For the Germans, it was a tale of disbelief. How could a boy barely out of his teens halt an entire assault? Yet history would remember that cold morning not as myth but as fact, documented by officers, soldiers, and the smoking battlefield itself. It was an act that distilled the essence of the American war effort: courage, defiance, and the refusal to retreat even when logic demanded it. June 20th, 1924. In the dusty fields of Hunt County, Texas, the child was born who would one day stand alone against 250 Germans. Audie Leon Murphy entered the world as the seventh of 12 children in a sharecropper family that lived perpetually on the edge of hunger. His father, Emmett, drifted from job to job. His mother, Josie, fought to keep the family clothed and fed with little more than determination. By the time Audie turned 16, his father had abandoned the household. The boy assumed responsibilities far beyond his years, hunting rabbits and squirrels to feed siblings, dropping out of school after the 5th grade to pick cotton for $1 a day. Those early years forged resilience that no military academy could teach. Murphy's small frame, 5 feet 5 inches, barely 112 pounds, belied an iron core hardened by deprivation. "We had nothing," he would later recall. "So I learned not to expect much." Yet inside this frail body lay restless energy and a marksman's eye. Sharpened by necessity, the single-shot rifle he used to hunt for supper became his first school in precision and patience. When Josie Murphy died in 1941, Audie was just 17. The loss of his mother devastated him. With America entering World War II after Pearl Harbor, he turned to the army as both escape and purpose. At first, even this path seemed barred. The Marines and paratroopers rejected him for being too small and underweight. Only the U.S. Army agreed to take him in June 1942. After his sister falsified his age to meet enlistment requirements, basic training revealed a paradox. Murphy collapsed from heat exhaustion on long marches, yet on the rifle range he was unmatched. In live-fire exercise, his instinct for cover and movement astonished drill sergeants. By the time he shipped out with the 3rd Infantry Division in 1943, he had already earned a reputation as a quiet but deadly efficient soldier. In Sicily and Italy, he proved that reputation again and again. During the bitter climb at Mount Rotondo in October 1943, he single-handedly neutralized a German machine gun nest, saving his platoon. For this, he earned promotion to sergeant and his first decorations. By the campaign in southern France, Murphy was already wearing the Bronze Star and had twice been awarded the Silver Star for gallantry. His peers, often older and larger men, treated him with a respect bordering on awe. The contrast between appearance and ability became a recurring theme. He looked like a schoolboy, one officer wrote, but fought like a veteran sergeant major. German soldiers captured in Italy, stunned to learn that the wiry youth who had led an assault against them was barely 19, could only shake their heads. In a war defined by industrial might and armoured divisions, Murphy embodied the unquantifiable power of individual resolve. By late 1944, he had been commissioned a 2nd lieutenant. His rise was meteoric, climbing from private to officer in just over 2 years. A trajectory as rare as it was deserved. Yet he remained, at heart, the boy from Texas who had learned to survive by grit alone. He wrote to his siblings, sending home paychecks to keep them afloat, often more concerned for their welfare than his own survival at the front. This personal history shaped the soldier who would stand at Holtz. Every hardship of youth, the hunger, the loss, the rejection had burned away fear. To Murphy, danger was simply another adversary to be endured. His comrades often remarked on his uncanny calm in battle, as if bullets and shells were mere background noise. What they did not always see was the cost, the exhaustion etched into his face. The quiet moments when he admitted he felt dead inside after so much killing. The larger context magnified his significance. By 1945, the United States Army had swelled to over 8 million men, equipped with tens of thousands of tanks, aircraft, and artillery pieces. Yet the war still hinged on individuals willing to act decisively at critical junctures. Murphy was one such individual. His courage in Sicily and France foreshadowed the supreme test he would face in Alsace. The Germans had tanks, numbers, and momentum. The Americans had dwindling rifle companies stretched across snowbound fields. But in that imbalance lay the paradox of war. Sometimes, one man's refusal to yield outweighed a battalion's advance. Foreshadowing loomed with every engagement. Fellow officers noted Murphy's recklessness, his tendency to place himself in exposed positions, as though daring fate. He's going to get himself killed one of these days, a captain remarked after witnessing him lead an assault in southern France. Instead, fate seemed to reserve him for something larger, a moment when the outcome of hundreds would depend on the will of one. Thus the boy from Hunt County, who once shouldered a rifle to feed his family, carried a Browning machine gun atop a burning tank destroyer. His journey from cotton fields to the Colmar pocket was not mere coincidence, but the accumulation of every hardship endured and every battle survived. In him, America's story condensed into a single figure, impoverished beginnings, relentless perseverance, and the ability to rise when the odds dictated surrender. And so, when dawn broke on January 26, 1945, and German infantry advanced with tanks across the snow, Audie Murphy did not see hopelessness. He saw another hunt, another moment when survival depended on aim, nerve, and refusal to flinch. The boy who once fought hunger with a rifle was now fighting an army with a machine gun. January 26, 1945. The morning frost clung to the bare trees of Holtz, a small French village on the southern edge of the Colmar pocket. Snow lay heavy across the fields, muffling footsteps, yet amplifying every burst of gunfire. The German 21st Panzer Division, reinforced by infantry battalions numbering in the hundreds, prepared a counterattack. Their mission was simple: break through the thin American line, retake Holtzwehr, and stabilize the Colmar front that threatened Germany's southern flank. On the American side, the 3rd Infantry Division's 15th Regiment had been reduced to fragments by weeks of relentless fighting. Companies once numbering 150 men were now skeleton units of barely 30. Lieutenant Audie Murphy, commanding Company B, found himself holding a sector of forest and field with fewer than 40 exhausted soldiers. Against them loomed nearly 250 Germans, supported by 6 tanks and waves of artillery. At 8 in the morning, the attack began. German artillery rained down with mechanical precision, shells bursting in the treetops and sending shards of steel whistling through branches. The ground shook as Panzer IV tanks advanced, their treads grinding ice into black mud. Infantry in grey coats followed, rifles raised, shouting orders in clipped German. To the American defenders, it looked less like an assault than a tidal wave of iron and flesh. Murphy made a decision that would define his life. He ordered his men to fall back into the woods to establish a secondary defensive line. Alone at the forward position stood a disabled M10 tank destroyer, its crew long since evacuated after enemy fire had set it ablaze. Flames licked at its hull, and black smoke curled skyward like a funeral pyre. Instead of retreating, Murphy climbed onto its hull, mounted behind the 50 caliber Browning machine gun, and prepared to face the oncoming tide. The symbolism was stark. One small man atop a burning hulk, daring an army to advance. The contrast between fragility and defiance could not have been sharper. At 5'5" and barely 100 pounds, Murphy looked almost swallowed by the heavy weapon. Yet when he squeezed the trigger, the sound was unmistakable. The Browning roared at 500 rounds per minute, each bullet a tracer of orange fire tearing across the snow. German infantry staggered, fell, and scattered. For nearly 1 hour, Murphy held his position. He fired belt after belt of ammunition until the metal barrel glowed red. Enemy soldiers tried to flank him, but each attempt ended in bodies sprawled across the snow. German tanks responded with high explosive shells, shattering trees around him and showering splinters across his uniform. At one point, shrapnel ripped into his leg, but he refused to leave the gun. He later confessed, "I was scared all the time, but I just kept firing. If I left, the Germans would have overrun my men." The statistics defy belief. Audie Murphy, standing alone, killed or wounded an estimated 50 Germans, forcing an entire force of nearly 250 to halt and regroup. When the Browning finally ran dry, he limped back to his company line, rallying his men for a counterattack. Inspired by his stand, they surged forward and drove the remaining Germans from the field. Holtzwehr remained in American hands. From a tactical perspective, the victory was disproportionate. One lieutenant, with one weapon, had delayed a battalion-sized assault long enough for the American line to reform. Strategically, the defense helped close the Colmar pocket. denying the Germans a vital stronghold on the western bank of the Rhine. The ripple effect reached far beyond that snowy village, hastening the collapse of German defences in Alsace. But the human dimension proved equally powerful. Soldiers who witnessed the spectacle would never forget it. One recalled, "We thought he was finished. Then we saw him up there on the tank, firing like he was an army all by himself." The Krauts couldn't believe it either. German prisoners later admitted they assumed Murphy was supported by hidden reinforcements. In reality, it was one man refusing to yield. The foreshadowing of earlier battles came full circle. The boy who once hunted rabbits to feed siblings had transformed into a lone defender of an entire company. The private, once dismissed for his size, now held a battalion at bay. The symbolism burned into the snow of Holtz, courage as artillery, determination as armor. A single figure standing where logic dictated retreat. When silence finally fell across the frozen fields, the Americans counted the cost. Dozens of Germans lay dead. Scores more wounded or captured. Company B, though battered, remained intact. The casualty list was mercifully short for Murphy's men, thanks to the sacrifice of the lieutenant who had stood on fire itself to protect them. The drama of Holtz resonated not only with those who fought there, but across the entire U.S. Army. Reports spread quickly. A lone officer, injured and exposed, had held off a battalion. To weary soldiers across Europe, it became a story of defiance. A reminder that even in the darkest winter, the line could hold. And yet, for Audie Murphy, the hour atop the burning tank destroyer marked both triumph and burden. It secured his place in history, but it also etched scars that no medal could erase. For in that moment, he had looked into the abyss of annihilation and chosen to stand, alone, until the abyss itself flinched. The smoke still hung low over Holtz when silence settled across the snow-covered battlefield. American soldiers crept from their foxholes, blinking at the wreckage of German armor still smouldering in the fields. To them, the miracle was simple. They had survived. And survival had come from the impossible stand of one man on a burning tank destroyer. Company B counted its numbers. Out of fewer than 40 defenders, only a handful were wounded. Against them lay scores of German dead, their grey coats scattered like shadows across the white snow. Prisoners, dazed and trembling, spoke of being pinned down by what they thought was a reinforced company with hidden machine guns. The truth, a single lieutenant and one 50 caliber Browning was too absurd to believe. When word of the battle reached regimental headquarters, the reports seemed exaggerated. Could one man truly have delayed nearly 250 Germans, destroyed 6 armoured vehicles, and killed or wounded more than 50 enemy soldiers? Field officers confirmed the details. The after-action report, stark and clinical, recorded the facts without flourish. Lieutenant Audie Murphy, while wounded and alone, manned an abandoned tank destroyer's machine gun for approximately 1 hour, repelled enemy infantry, and enabled Company B to hold its position. The statistics spoke for themselves. A single officer's action had preserved an entire flank of the 3rd Infantry Division, preventing a German breakthrough that might have unravelled the Colmar defence. In strategic terms, Holtz became one of the final nails in the coffin of the Colmar pocket. Within days, German resistance in Alsace collapsed, and the Rhine frontier lay exposed. For Murphy, the hours after battle were strangely anticlimactic. Exhausted and bleeding from shrapnel wounds, he walked the field in silence. Comrades described him as pale and withdrawn, speaking little. as if the roar of the Browning still echoed in his ears. When congratulated, he shrugged. I didn't think I'd make it. I just couldn't let them take my men. End. The U.S. Army wasted no time in recognizing what had occurred. Recommendations for the Medal of Honor traveled up the chain of command. Supported by unanimous witness testimony, the Medal of Honor, awarded sparingly even in the bloodiest war, required proof beyond doubt. In Murphy's case, there was no debate. On June 2nd, 1945, in Salzburg, Austria, Lieutenant Audie Murphy stood before a formation as his citation was read aloud. The words carried the weight of history. By his single-handed action, Lieutenant Murphy killed or wounded 50 Germans, destroyed 6 tanks, and held the line against overwhelming odds. His courage and leadership reflect the highest traditions of the military service. When the medal was pinned to his uniform, Murphy's expression remained stoic. Those who knew him said he seemed embarrassed by the ceremony, as if the spotlight sat uncomfortably on his narrow shoulders. Numbers frame the uniqueness of his feat. Of the 16 million Americans who served in World War II, only 464 received the Medal of Honor. Murphy, at just 20 years old, became the most decorated American soldier of the war, with 33 distinct awards and citations. In military annals, his Holtz stand ranked alongside the most extraordinary acts of individual defiance ever recorded. But beyond statistics lay symbolism. In Murphy's stand, soldiers and civilians alike saw something larger than tactics or firepower. They saw the embodiment of American resilience, the refusal to yield even when logic demanded retreat. At a time when the war still raged across Europe and the Pacific, the story of Holtz became both legend and morale. Newspapers carried his photograph, slight of frame, almost boyish in appearance, juxtaposed against headlines describing his impossible victory. One Chicago Tribune editorial wrote, "Audie Murphy is proof that the courage of one man can equal the strength of an army." The emotional layering was profound. To fellow soldiers, Murphy's deed was a rallying cry. If one man could hold against a battalion, then surely an army could endure until victory. To the American public, weary from years of casualty lists, rationing, and uncertainty, it was a spark of pride, a reminder that their sons overseas carried not only weapons but indomitable will. Comparative historians drew parallels to Thermopylae, to lone champions in ancient wars who had stood against overwhelming odds. Yet, unlike myth, Holtz was documented in official reports, marked on maps, and remembered in blood and steel. The cliffhanger remained. Could such defiance come without cost? For Murphy, the answer would be revealed not in medals but in scars. The transition was clear. Audie Murphy had passed from soldier to symbol, from lieutenant to legend. But legends, however bright, cast shadows. Behind the acclaim, a young man of 20 carried burdens invisible to photographers and journalists. Holtz had given him immortality, but also memories from which he could never retreat. When the guns of Europe finally fell silent in May of 1945, the world tried to return to normal. For Audie Murphy, normal was a concept that no longer existed. He came home not just as a lieutenant, but as the most decorated soldier of the Second World War. 33 awards adorned his record. Among them, the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and the French Croix de Guerre. At barely 21 years old, he carried more decorations than generals twice his age. Newspapers hailed him as the boy who stood alone against an army. The American David against a German Goliath. But behind the medals, the man remained haunted. Friends recalled that Murphy would wake in the night, drenched in sweat, reaching for a pistol that was no longer there. What civilians called glory, soldiers recognized as trauma. The U.S. Army would later give the condition a name post-traumatic stress disorder, but in 1945, it was simply called battle fatigue. For Murphy, it was a shadow that followed him for the rest of his life. America, however, needed symbols, and Audie Murphy became one willingly, yet uneasily. He was invited to parades, interviews, and ceremonies. Time magazine placed him on its cover. Hollywood called next. By 1949, Murphy was cast in films, often as the very soldier he had once been. The most famous of these, To Hell and Back, released in 1955, was based on his own memoir. It became the highest-grossing war film in Universal Pictures history until Jaws 2 decades later. Audiences saw the hero they had read about, reenacting his stand on the burning tank destroyer. What they did not see was the cost. Murphy often broke down between takes, reliving the screams and the gunfire of Holtz. Numbers again framed his paradox. Out of the 16 million Americans who served in the war, the vast majority faded back into anonymity. Murphy, one of only 464 Medal of Honor recipients, was asked to remain in the spotlight. He did so with dignity, yet also with visible discomfort. He used his fame to advocate for veterans, openly speaking about the invisible wounds of war. At a time when such subjects were taboo, Murphy broke silence, declaring that his fellow soldiers deserved more than parades, they deserved care. Yet even as a public figure, he lived modestly. He refused to capitalize on his legend, turning down endorsements that he felt cheapened the sacrifices of his comrades. He once said, "The real heroes are the boys who never came home." That statement, repeated in interviews across decades, revealed the survivor's guilt that never left him. In May of 1971, at the age of just 46, Audie Murphy died in a plane crash in Virginia. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Today, his grave is among the most visited in Arlington, second only to that of President John F. Kennedy. Visitors leave flowers, flags, and handwritten notes, not just to honor a soldier, but to connect with the legend of one man who stood alone on a battlefield and did not break. The symbolism endures. Historians rank Holtz among the greatest individual acts of defiance in modern warfare. Military academies teach it as an example of courage under impossible odds. Cultural critics compare Murphy to figures of myth Achilles, Roland, Leonidas, but insist his story is stronger because it is real. The big picture tie-in is unmistakable. In a war defined by production numbers 50,000 Sherman tanks, 96,000 aircraft in a single year, 16 million men in uniform, one man with a machine gun could still alter the outcome of a battle. Audie Murphy's stand proved that technology, numbers, and strategy matter. But the human spirit can tip the scales in ways no statistic can predict. For Germany, Holtz was just one lost skirmish among thousands in a collapsing front. For America, it became a parable of grit, resilience, and sacrifice. 70 years later, the words of a German prisoner still echo, "We thought there was an entire company. Instead, it was one man." Oh, and so Audie Murphy remains not only a soldier of his time, but a symbol across generations. He reminds us that courage can emerge from the unlikeliest figures, that legends are often born not in comfort but in fire. Above all, his story affirms that in the darkest winters of war, when defeat seems certain, one man's refusal to yield can change the course of history.